Upon learning that Anakin had fallen to the dark side to become the Sith apprentice of Darth Sidious, Jedi Masters Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda realized that they had to split up and confront the Sith Lords individually. Although Obi-Wan initially protested the idea of confronting his friend and former apprentice, it was ultimately decided that Obi-Wan would be the one to confront Darth Vader, and Yoda would face Darth Sidious. Of course, we know how the individual duels turned out. Whereas Yoda failed to defeat the Dark Lord of the Sith, Obi-Wan was successful in defeating Vader on Mustafar, leaving the Sith Lord significantly maimed and incapacitated, but alive. But what if the roles had been reversed, and Yoda was the Jedi to have confronted Darth Vader on Mustafar? Initial thinking might say that it would be a relatively easy victory for the Jedi Master, for if Obi-Wan was able to emerge victorious from his duel with Vader, then certainly Yoda should as well. But this ignores critical elements, such as the uniqueness of Obi-Wan and Anakin's friendship, and the vast differences in lightsaber styles between Obi-Wan and Yoda. In fact, there are many important components that make a Yoda and Vader duel completely different than the one seen in Revenge of the Sith. So the question must be asked, what if Yoda confronted Darth Vader on Mustafar? Let's start by examining the lightsaber techniques of both combatants. Yoda was a master of lightsaber combat and widely recognized as one of the greatest Jedi lightsaber duelists of his era. Although he'd mastered all 7 forms recognized by the Jedi Order, his form of choice was Form 4, also known as a Taru, and he was considered to have mastered this form to its highest level. An aggressive style, Form 4 combines speed, agility, and strength, and utilized force-assisted acrobatics such as leaping assaults and somersaults, to deliver fast and powerful offensive strikes from multiple directions. Importantly, as a Form 4 practitioner, Yoda would constantly press the attack and always be on the offense against his opponent. Through the assistance of the Force ability of Force Valor to increase his resolve, speed, and accuracy, he could overcome his limitations due to age, and batter his opponent's defenses with high speed and powerful blows. Therefore, during his confrontation with Darth Vader on Mustafar, Yoda would have sought to dominate the Sith Lord through his impressive onslaught and offense-focused attack as demanded by Form 4. As we contrast this style to that used by Obi-Wan in his duel with Vader, we'll see why this would have a tremendously different impact on the duel between Yoda and Vader. But first, let's see the lightsaber style that Vader would use in his duel against Yoda. Vader would utilize Form 5, also known as Gem So, the 5th of the 7 lightsaber forms recognized by the Jedi Order. Form 5 was developed out of the belief that Form 3 was too reliant upon defense, and would needlessly prolong duels and create more risk than necessary. Therefore, Form 5 was developed to still observe the important foundations of defense, but to follow up these defensive maneuvers with a counterattack of their own when it became necessary, or when an opening was found within their opponent's defense. Importantly, Form 5 called for the practitioner to use their opponent's attack against them, and emphasized returning their opponent's offense in kind. Form 5 didn't just call for a simple counterattack. Rather, it required that following the user's proper practice and setup through the defensive tenets of blocks and parries, they completely take advantage of the position created by their defense to press and dominate the assault. In doing so, Form 5 practitioners would enhance their strength using the Force, and use powerful combinations to overwhelm their opponent's defenses by bringing the force of their opponent's attack against them. It should be noted that following Anakin's fall to the dark side, he used an angry and rage-induced variant of Form 5, wherein he delivered a particularly brutal and relentless rain of strikes. So we know that in our what-if scenario, where Yoda confronts Vader on Mustafar, Yoda would use an extremely aggressive Form 4, wherein he would constantly be on the offensive, using a combination of force-assisted speed, agility, and strength to use fast and powerful attacks. On the other hand, Vader would use his mastery of Form 5 to first gain an advantage by maintaining the proper defensive foundations, but then counterattack, using Yoda's aggressive style against him, and using a brutal onslaught of powerful combinations and strikes to attempt to overpower Yoda's defenses. But who would have the advantage in this stylistic matchup, Yoda or Vader? What we do know is that Yoda's reliance on Form 4 would be much less effective against Vader than Obi-Wan's style. In fact, Obi-Wan's use of Form 3 was the perfect counter to Vader's style, and we can confidently say that Obi-Wan was a far better matchup against Vader than Yoda, in regards to pure lightsaber style. And we certainly can't say that just because Obi-Wan defeated Vader, Yoda would also emerge victorious. But what was Obi-Wan's style, and how did it perfectly counter Vader's Form 5, to the point that we can conclude that Yoda would have been significantly worse off in a lightsaber duel with the Sith Lord than Obi-Wan? In his duel against Vader on Mustafar, Obi-Wan utilized the third of the 7 classic forms, also known as Surisu. Form 3 was the form most focused on defense. It's centered around strong defensive techniques, with the goal of outlasting one's opponent and patiently waiting until their frustration and fatigue could be taken advantage of. Utilizing subtle dodges, efficient parries, and tight movements, Form 3 attempted to provide the practitioner with maximum protection and defensive coverage with a minimal amount of exposure to their opponent's offensive attacks. Relying purely on defense, Form 3 made those who mastered it practically invincible. By employing Form 3 against Vader, Obi-Wan had the advantage in being able to use the style that perfectly countered Vader's aggressive version of Form 5. One of the primary reasons for Obi-Wan's victory on Mustafar was his ability to focus entirely on defense, and to essentially wait out Vader until the Sith Lord's frustration and pride caused him to make a mistake that Obi-Wan could take advantage of, which is exactly what happened. Obi-Wan was able to simply deflect and block Vader's onslaught until he guided the duel to a location that gave him the advantage, and pushed Vader to forego his defense. But it wasn't just Obi-Wan's use of Form 3 that allowed him to defeat Vader. Rather, it was the fact that the Jedi Master had not only mastered Form 3, but in the eyes of his fellow Masters on the High Council, he was viewed as the master of the form. In fact, Mace Windu, one of the great swordsmen of his era, considered Obi-Wan's mastery of the classic form to firmly place him within the company of the Order's best duelists, right there with Windu and Yoda. Thus, Obi-Wan's mastery and use of the purely defense-focused Form 3 against Vader gave him a significant advantage over the Sith Lord. By merely trying to survive, Obi-Wan was ultimately able to use Form 3 to protect himself, drive the duel to a location that gave him the advantage, and then make use of Vader's frustration and arrogance to win the duel. Not only would Yoda not have the advantages presented by Form 3, but his reliance on Form 4 would put him in a much more dangerous position relative to what Obi-Wan was able to achieve against Vader. Yoda's focus primarily on offense through Form 4 would not have allowed him to take advantage of Vader's frustrations and pride, but more importantly, it would have allowed Vader to utilize the advantages of his own style. As Yoda pressed the assault, Vader would have been able to rely on the defensive foundations of Form 5 to defend himself against Yoda's initial attack. He could then use an aggressive counterattack that was the central tenet of Gem So, to use the power of Yoda's attack against him, and deliver his own barrage of combinations defined by brute strength to attempt to overwhelm Yoda's defenses. By not having the ability to bring Form 3's defensive tenets to bear against Vader, not only would Yoda be denied the ability to lengthen the duel and gain a tactical advantage over the rage-fueled Sith Lord, Yoda's Form 4 would play right into Vader's most important strength and what was completely withheld from him in the Obi-Wan duel, which was his ability to counterattack, utilizing the growing power of the dark side to fuel his assault. It must be remembered that while Yoda and Obi-Wan were each a master of their preferred lightsaber forms, Vader was also a master of Form 5, with Dooku believing that he was the greatest Gem So stylist he'd ever seen. Therefore, in regard to skills with a lightsaber and the conflict of styles in our what-if scenario, we can conclude that Yoda's style would be far less effective against Vader than Obi-Wan's style, wherein rather than being the perfect counter to Vader's Form 5, Yoda's Form 4 allowed the Sith Lord to utilize his powerful counterattacks. Further, Yoda wouldn't have been able to easily gain the positional and tactical advantage over Vader, nor prey upon the fallen Jedi's pride and arrogance. But there were other advantages that Obi-Wan specifically had over Vader in their duel that Yoda wouldn't have in our what if, thereby again allowing us to conclude that it would be unlikely for Yoda to replicate what Obi-Wan was able to do. Obi-Wan fared much better against Vader because he spent literally thousands of hours training in lightsaber combat with Anakin. As described in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, blade to blade they were identical. After thousands of hours in lightsaber sparring, they knew each other better than brothers, more intimately than lovers. They were complementary halves of a single warrior. Clearly, Yoda wouldn't have had the level of experience with Vader's lightsaber abilities as Obi-Wan did, and would have therefore been at a disadvantage in this regard. Further, the Revenge of the Sith novelization does an excellent job of describing the context of the Obi-Wan Vader duel, which also came across in the film. The duel between Obi-Wan and Vader was an extremely unique and personal duel, about as personal as one can get. As it was described in the novelization, the duel was not Sith versus Jedi, not light versus dark, and not even good versus evil. Nor did their duel come down to duty, philosophy, morals, or religion. Rather, it was Anakin versus Obi-Wan, just the two of them and the damage that they had done to each other. Understanding this important context of the Obi-Wan and Vader duel, we can see how Vader would have been at an even larger disadvantage to Obi-Wan's Soresu style, as the personal nature of the duel between the former master and apprentice would have worked to further fuel Vader's pride and arrogance, leaving him vulnerable to the defensive tenets of Obi-Wan's Form 3. While this isn't to say that Vader wouldn't have been susceptible to these emotions in his duel against Yoda, what we can say is that they wouldn't have been as great as when he was confronted by Obi-Wan, and even if they were, Yoda's offense-focused style would not have been able to exploit them like Obi-Wan's defense-focused style was able to. So, can we say that Yoda's weaknesses and disadvantages relative to Obi-Wan, in that Yoda's style would be less effective, he wasn't as familiar with Vader's style through countless hours of training together, and he wouldn't have been able to exploit the newly christened Sith Lord's pride and arrogance, were enough to tip the balance in Darth Vader's favor in our what-if scenario, and allow us to conclude that if Yoda was the one to have confronted Vader on Mustafar, that Vader would emerge victorious. Although Yoda wouldn't have been as well off as Obi-Wan in regard to these aspects, there is still enough evidence to allow us to conclude that in our what-if, Yoda would defeat Darth Vader on Mustafar. Yoda's abilities in mastery of the Force and lightsaber combat hardly need to be expanded upon. As a Grand Master of the Jedi Order, he was incredibly powerful in the Force, and as a Master of Form 4, he was able to take the Form's tenets to their highest level, making him virtually unstoppable in combat. However, the fact that, in many ways, Yoda was in a class by himself is evident in the following description from the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Yoda was the Avatar of Light, Supreme Master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most implacable, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known. While Yoda wasn't able to defeat Darth Sidious, the reasons for his failure were specific to the abilities of Sidious, and would not be a factor in a duel with Vader. The reason for Yoda's failure to defeat Sidious was that the Dark Lord of the Sith was the beneficiary of 1,000 years of the Sith evolving and adapting to destroy the Jedi Order. Through the foresight and genius of Darth Bane, the Sith had grown well past what any Jedi, including Yoda, could contend with, as they spent a millennium studying every aspect of the Force and Jedi lore in preparation for their destruction of the Jedi Order. Because Yoda had spent the same time training to fight the Sith of the previous era, he was unable to match the power of the new Sith, as represented by Sidious. Although Vader had fallen to the dark side to join the Sith, by the time of his duel with Yoda in our What If, he wouldn't have been the beneficiary of the evolution and power of the Sith in the same way that Sidious was, and therefore, Yoda's failings against Sidious wouldn't be borne out in the same way against Vader. Vader wouldn't have even started his tutelage under Sidious by the time of his duel with Yoda in our scenario, and thus would not have been part of the remade Sith that was impossible for Yoda to contend with. But more importantly, we can say with confidence that Yoda would defeat Vader if he was the one to confront him on Mustafar, based upon what Sidious and Vader themselves said about the outcome of a potential duel between Vader and Yoda. Only weeks after Vader was defeated by Obi-Wan, Sidious recognized that his apprentice lost because he'd still been between worlds on Mustafar. That is, Vader hadn't fully abandoned the light side and hadn't yet fully embraced the dark. Sidious understood that this imbalance made Vader vulnerable and significantly contributed to his defeat. In fact, as Vader was lamenting the fact that he was defeated by his former master, Sidious was brutally honest with Vader and told him, "Just imagine what Yoda might have done to you," thereby suggesting that had Yoda been the one to confront him, he wouldn't have survived. Ultimately, Vader came to accept the same truth in this regard, and was at least grateful for being alive, despite his horrible injuries. This is extremely telling for our what-if scenario, as we have both Sidious and Vader understanding that if Yoda took Obi-Wan's place and confronted Vader on Mustafar, Yoda would have been able to defeat and kill Vader, as he would have been able to take advantage of the Sith Lord's vulnerability in being between worlds. But when Yoda was able to best Vader in their duel, would the Jedi Master go the extra step that Obi-Wan couldn't take, and actually kill the former Jedi? I believe that we can undeniably say that Yoda would have killed Vader on Mustafar. One of the primary reasons why Obi-Wan didn't kill Vader was his attachment and respect for who Anakin had been, something that was particularly unique in relation to other Jedi. Not only did Yoda not share this attachment, but Yoda made it perfectly clear to Obi-Wan just prior to embarking to Kashyyyk that the Jedi way called for any Jedi to sacrifice another in the cause of peace, with Yoda openly declaring that he would sacrifice Obi-Wan's life if it meant ending the Clone Wars only one day sooner. I believe that this would apply to Yoda and his decision to kill Vader to further the cause of peace. Although Obi-Wan wasn't able to do so because of his unique personal attachment and friendship with Anakin, Yoda wouldn't have been burdened by these attachments, and in the cause of peace and preventing the gruesome acts that the Sith would carry out across the galaxy, Yoda would have been able to strike down the fallen Jedi and kill Vader on Mustafar. So there we have it. Why Yoda would have defeated and killed Darth Vader if he was the one to confront him on Mustafar instead of Obi-Wan. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions? Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. If not for me, for seething rage.